Chapter 20. If I'd known the message I was carrying, I might have delivered it more carefully, or I would have tried to, but I'm not sure. In fact, if that was possible. In those strange circumstances, in the glow of 2 kerosene lanterns, enclosed by the aura of this old man in his chair, dancing back and forth between past and present, truth and falsehood, and with the photographs of the 2 women lying between us, in such circumstances, my announcement was nothing short of a miracle, and miracles aren't led up to, they simply happen. Strangely, I think the effect was the same on both of us. Transported beyond bewilderment, disarmed beyond confusion, we were equally amazed. Shastov's face moved through a dozen expressions, settling on none, and when he finally tried to speak, he couldn't. I suppose 40 years of the unutterable was lodged in his throat. So in the end, I did the talking. I told him everything, about Brightman, about May, about what had happened. At a certain point, I mentioned her name, and it was then, for the first time, that he cried. May, virtually the same word in both English and Russian, had been the name he and his wife had given their child. Brightman had kept it. The tears began trickling down his cheeks, and as he wept, it seemed to me that his tears were as much for his wife as for anything else. She had suddenly been brought back to life by that photograph, only to die once again, and once again without knowing that her daughter was safe. In the midst of hope, hopelessness. After that, there didn't seem to be much more to say, so I waited, but then I reminded myself that this was a Russian house, and Russian homes always have a solution for grief. In the back wall of the place, beyond the light from the lamps, we still awaited the witching hour of 6. There was a door that led into a kitchen. It was a small bare room, the floor strewn with sawdust. A Dutch door, opening over a table and sink for preparing the animals' feed, gave on to a lean-to shelter with a wooden trough that was filled with black, rotted straw. An iron stove with a fire burning stood on the far side of the room. To give the old man more time to recover, I added a log and stoked it up, and then found vodka and glasses in a small cupboard and returned to the front room. He'd got himself back together. When I gave him the vodka, he drank it straight back, then held his glass out for more. I poured, and this time he sipped. "You will think us so wicked." "No, I don't think that, Mr. Shastov." He shook his head. "You will think she was wicked to do it, and that I was even more wicked, the husband to let her." "Why did she want to?" One of the oil lamps sent an oily curl of soot into the air. Bending forward, he turned down the wick. Then, taking another sip of the vodka, he wiped at his eyes with the edge of the sheet. "You must understand," he said. "We had a baby in Pirm, when we were first married, a baby boy, but he died almost at once. My wife was grief-stricken, and we swore never to have any more. And she didn't. People here in the village used to say that I must treat her like a saint, or the very devil. But in truth it was her doing. She was always so careful. But then she thought that all was finished, and she couldn't have any more, and shortly after she became pregnant. I was glad, honestly I was glad. Even here, even as we were living here then, I wanted a child. But she was very upset. I think once she tried to end it. There was a woman in the village, and yet it didn't work, for the child came. It almost killed my wife. However, she was too old. The child was all right, but my wife knew that she was going to die, and if she died, how could the child live? There was no milk here. There is almost none now, you see. That's why she wanted to." I could see it, in that hut, in that light, so near the canal and its graveyard of anonymous bones. I could believe desperation without any limits. Yes, so she thought. She asked me to let her save the child's life. She said she knew people who would take her, look after her. If she lived through the winter, then fine, our little girl would come back. But if she died, or if I died, the child would go on. I was frightened, because she didn't tell me who these people were. She wrote a letter that she wouldn't let me read. But she grew weaker and weaker. It was clear what was happening. To have refused her would have killed her last hope. So I let them come, and they took the baby away. Not long after, she died, and then the war came. I always thought that my wife had seen the war coming, and I told myself she'd been right. She was dead, and whatever might happen to me, at least our daughter was safe. "Who were the men?" He looked me straight in the eye, and now, without doubt, I was getting the truth. I don't know. Why did they want the child? I don't know. I'm not sure they did. I thought then that they were only taking her to somebody else. What did they look like? Ordinary men, but from the city, from Leningrad, I expect. Two of them. One did all the talking. He had bushy hair, very curly, like Trotsky's. The other was bigger and said nothing, a big man with a big chest, a dignified face. Harry Brightman, taken by May Brightman, with her own brownie. I could see it then. I could see the dark interior of some smoky hovel, or their corner of a barrack. I could smell the sweat and the filth, hear the wind moan through the cracks in the walls. A baby cries. The woman's voice is desperate and weak, and Brightman waits calmly, off to one side, with Dr. Charlie's passport in his pocket. But why? Why Yuri Shastov's little girl? I said, "You say that the first man looked like Trotsky, but he wasn't? You're sure of that?" No, I'm sure. By then, I think poor Trotsky was dead. In fact, he hadn't been killed till that summer, but the chances of his being in Russia at that point were nil. I nodded. The second man, that was Brightman. So I have met him? Yes. And now he sent me this letter. I nodded. And now you know why. No, Mr. Thorne, I still don't understand that. I wondered if I did. Had Harry sent the money to Shastov as a final despairing gesture? Had he simply wanted to put everyone off the trail? Or had he decided that Shastov might be the only person on Earth who had any moral claim to the gold? But then, thinking this through, I decided that the answer was probably simpler. He loved his daughter, Mr. Shastov, your daughter. At the end of his life, I think he loved her more than anything else in the world, even more than life itself. He felt he owed you a great deal, and he was trying to repay the debt. A moment passed. Shastov picked up the photographs of May, held it up to his face. He said, "You know, what you say is wrong, Mr. Thorne. I owe him more than he owed me, and I owe you as well. It is I who have the debts to repay." He set the photograph down. "And now I shall pay them. I have the letter Brightman has sent me. Olga brought it this morning. She is a woman who helps me. It was just as you said, from the Soviet embassy in Paris." I sat back, startled, then smiled. "You're very good at keeping secrets, Yuri Fyodorovich. As I warned you, I think. What did the letter say? See for yourself." Hitching himself to one side, he now reached under his blankets and drew out a heavy, padded envelope, just as Elaine had described. A large printed label bore the address of the new embassy on the boulevard lawn. The envelope was already torn open. Taking it from him, I extracted the contents. There were 2 items. The first was a letter, typed in Cyrillic on the very genuine-looking embassy letterhead. It read, "Your letter more properly should have been addressed to the appropriate ministry in Moscow, or directly to the government of the Republic of France. However, on this one occasion only, we have fulfilled your request." It was signed by a second assistant consular officer. The request, apparently, had concerned horticulture, for the only other item in the envelope was a publication from the French Department of Agriculture on apple orchards. It was a thick, soft-cover book, not unlike a museum catalogue, and was printed on glossy stock, with numerous black and white photographs and drawings. This was all? Everything, you understand. I had no idea what to make of it. It was obvious what Brightman must have done. Carefully I began cutting up the envelope with my pocket knife, scattering fluff everywhere. There was nothing inside, however, so I turned to the book, and it held the treasure. Stripping the spine away from the binding revealed a length of carefully fitted plastic wrap, which protected the following: 1 flat metal key, 1 birth certificate, Province of Ontario, Canada, for Harold Charles Brightman, 1 Ontario driver's license in the same name, and a receipt to Brightman from a branch of the Dauphine Deposit Bank, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The old man eyed me. "Have you found what you expected?" It was a good question. Was this what I'd expected? But then I nodded. Yes, the papers let you use the key, and the key is the key to a great fortune. I passed the papers across to him. Turning them over in his lap, he picked up the bank receipt and squinted at it. Harrisburg, he said. That is the capital of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I smiled. That one I know, Mr. Shastov. You have been there? Many times. My father was from that part of the country, and we spent our summers there. Harrisburg. Should I have expected that too? But even as my mind had registered the coincidence, I realized, deep in my heart, that I'd known all along. Shastov leaned forward, handed back the papers. They were sent to me, Mr. Thorne, so please accept them as my gift. I said, it's hard to know whom they truly belong to. You must have heard that famous expression, possession is 9/10 of the law. It creates something of a problem in this case. I don't understand. I told you, other men have been searching for this. I possess it now, but they think you do. When they come here, you'll be in danger. Why should I be? I'll tell them you have the envelope. I'll tell them it came, what was in it, no lies, you see no secrets, and then I gave it to you, or I could say I sold it to you. They'd believe that. I had no use for this foolish pamphlet, but you wanted to give me the money, so I took it. I looked at the old man. His notion was logical, but I didn't like it. On the other hand, time was moving on. I wanted to get out of here fast, not only to avoid Subotin, but also to reach Leningrad before I was missed. And his idea might work. Might. If it didn't, not a pretty thought, not something I wanted to have on my conscience. I shook my head. Listen, Yuri Fyodorovich, what you suggest could work, but it frightens me. These men are going to be very, very angry to learn that I've beaten them to this, so they could hurt you, even if it doesn't make sense. No, for them that would just make more trouble. Maybe, but I'm not sure. And I have another idea. Remember, you have a daughter again. She's well off, rich. I'm sure she would be happy to see you. Why not go to her? Wait now, I'm not crazy. I know certain things about these other men that the Chekists would like to know. In return for what I could tell them, I'm sure they'd let you out of the country. He picked up May's photograph, stared at it a moment, and then his gaze wandered away. He looked around the room. My eyes followed his, sculpted by the flickering flames. It was like the inside of a cave, but a cave where men had lived for centuries, like the catacombs of the old Russian church fathers. Finally, with a little smile, he shook his head. I don't think so, he said. I'm glad to have this. He held up the photograph of May. But would she really want to see me? He shrugged. Who can tell? Besides, this is my home, Mr. Thorne. It may not seem much to you, but I don't think I could live anywhere else. I am like the old man in the story of the wolf. You must know it. He is an old man who lived with his wife, 5 sheep, a colt, and a calf, and one day a wolf came and sang them a song. At once the man's wife said, What a wonderful song! Give him a sheep. The old man did so, and the wolf ate it, but soon he returned, singing again, and he kept singing that song until he'd eaten them all the sheep, the colt, the calf, even the woman. The old man was alone. Again the wolf came, but this time the old man grabbed up a stick and beat him. So the wolf went away, never to return, leaving the old man alone in his misery. You see, Mr. Thorne, this place, Russia, may be as mean as a wolf, but it is all I have left. If I leave it or drive it away, what would I do? Again he shook his head. No, he said, I will stay here, but I don't want you to worry. I will. No, tell me, do you have any American money? Yes. A lot? $100? More. That is enough. Give it to me. If these men come, I'll show it to them. Have no fear. They'll believe me then. And you know what they'll do? They'll threaten me, for it's illegal to take foreign money. All I have to do after that is act frightened and tell them everything. You came here in the car. A dark Ziguli. Good. And you told me you were going from here back to Leningrad. So they'll believe it and leave me alone. It was shrewd, and he could bring it off if anyone could. All right, I said. I agree. But do one more thing for me. Go and stay with someone, or have someone stay here. He was making a face. No. What about this woman, Olga? His expression turned even more sour. She wishes to marry me. On the day before I die I may let her, but not 1 minute sooner. He flapped his hand. However, I will do it for you. I'll tell her to come here. That is more natural. Then, rather to my surprise, he began to get up from the chair, not spryly perhaps, but with somewhat more locomotive power than I'd assumed he could muster. He was dressed in a flannel nightshirt, long underwear, many pairs of socks, and a pair of knitted slippers. Olga's handiwork, that came up to his knees.
We should go now, he said. She'll go down to the village when the store opens again. Passing through a curtained doorway, he emerged a few minutes later, as heavily bundled up in sweaters and coats as he'd been in his chair. We stepped outside. He took my arm, and I led him down to the road. It was late afternoon now. The sky was darkening, and the gray shadows of the birches and pines stretched out over the snow. But it was warmer, and only a few flakes drifted reluctantly down. As we walked in the tracks of a truck, separated by the space of its body, I had to slow my pace to Shastov's, but it was none the less clear that he could manage, stiffly and a little anxiously, but carefully, staying within himself, which I concluded was a good sign, and I began to worry less about him and Subotin. After 10 minutes, we reached the first canal road. It was here that Olga lived. "I'll fetch her," the old man said, "but don't come with me. It isn't far, and it would be best that she not see you." I nodded. We shook hands, and then, with a little spasm of embarrassment, he reached into the folds of his clothing and drew forth a small, black, leather-covered box. "For her," he said, "for my daughter. It was her mother's. It's all I have to give her, if you would." "Yes, of course." I took the box from him, though in fact it wasn't really a box, but a small traveling icon. The sides and tops were flaps, which could be folded open and propped up as a little altar. It is a traditional Russian present to honor a child's name day. That is, the feast day of the saint whose name forms part of the child's own. As was usually the case, an image of the saint was embossed on a small gold disc on the top flap. I didn't recognize which one it was, and this, in turn, was superimposed over a coat of arms. The Russian nobility usually employed their own arms here, but ordinary Russians, not entitled to such dignity, borrowed the national crest, the imperial eagles of the Romanovs, and this was what Yuri's wife had done. Beautifully enameled, outlined in gilt, a little worn, they glared up at me in all their ancient glory. "It's very lovely," I said. "I'll see May gets it." He smiled, and his dark eyes, peering out from under a huge wool cap that came down to his eyebrows, brightened. "And you'll also remember Pierre?" "South Dakota. And Bismarck?" "Yes, I'll remember." "Very good." Then, with a wave, he turned away. I watched him go. Further on he waved again, and then I turned toward the village. It was dark now. The road was empty. I trudged along in the tracks of the truck, but then, approaching the village, I swung off to my right. I waded across a rocky field toward some trees. They were some dying pines, their ash-gray bark peeling off in long strips, but the black shadows they cast reached out and swallowed me up. I struggled on. The wind was coming up, snow sifted down from the branches over my head, and there were sudden hollows where I plunged into my thighs. But I knew this was safer than the road. And then, just as I began to sense the lake up ahead, there was a sudden spatter of lights to my left. I knew it was 6. Turning back, I looked through the misting plume of my breath and had my last glimpse of Pavagnets glimmering through the trees. 20 minutes later, I arrived at the car. It was as I'd left it. Saying a prayer, I turned the key. It chugged a couple of times, but the battery was strong and it kicked over. As the engine warmed, I thought about this incredible day. I couldn't complain. I'd found more than I'd come for, yet even as I squeezed Brightman's key in my palm, I thought again that each aspect of this case, which I seemed to solve, only opened up another mystery. Unfolding the little icon, I set it up on the dash. I stroked the leather. It was soft as silk, and I realized that it must have been in Shastov's family, or his wife's, for generations. May was the last of her line, but who was she? And what connection was there between her real identity and Brightman's disappearance? The very questions I'd begun with had returned. Shastov had given me most of her story, but in truth, I had no idea what the story meant. I assumed that some of what Brightman told me was true. Granger had written he did go to Russia after all, and I'm sure he did get to know many men in the senior communist leadership. So I suspect that Brightman's daughter is the child of one of those men, someone who believed he would soon fall victim to Stalin's terror. At the time, it had seemed a good guess, but now I was sure it couldn't be true. Neither Shastov nor his wife had been a prominent communist, and Barry's notion wasn't much better. Don't kid yourself. Once upon a time, Dimitrov might have been your hero, but he ended up like the rest of them. By 1940, his hands were covered in blood. If he snatched a baby away from the Bolshevik, it was because he thought it might help save him, not the child. No doubt he was right about Dimitrov, but how could Yuri Shastov's child save anyone, and who would wish to save her? These were the questions that occupied my mind as I headed back to Leningrad, but they seemed unanswerable, and for the time being I had other problems. Most urgently, I was exhausted, and after winding back along the lake for 30 miles to thoroughly warm the engine, I found a side road and plowed up it. There I slept for 3 blissful hours, and when the cold awoke me, I was almost myself again. I started off. Now the miles and hours passed, and the tension built. What would happen back in Leningrad? I'd escaped Subotin, but if Loginyov really wanted me, there wasn't much to stop him, for Russia is as hard to leave as it is to enter. But perhaps he didn't want me. For him, I was the lure to draw Subotin out. In any case, when I got back to the hotel, no one seemed to notice, and when I returned the car, the original license plates once again in place, there was no comment. Gradually, my worries shifted. Where was Subotin? If I really was the lure, then I had to expect a strike, but I had no proof that he was even close. He must have come to Russia, but he would have had his own means of moving here and might be miles ahead of me, or just behind. That last night, as I lay exhausted in the Astoria, my conscience would have given anything for the power to make a simple call to Pavanets. Had Subotin been there? Was the old man all right? I guessed he was. When it came to survival, I would have bet on him no matter what the odds. But there was no way of telling, so the next morning I crossed my fingers, filled out all the forms, and headed for my plane. And as I felt the big engines thrust us up, I turned my thoughts to my destination, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Once again Brightman had shown a fox's cunning, and once again his secret trail circled back upon me. What did it mean? I had no idea, but as the Polish darkness drifted by below us, I fell asleep and dreamed, or rather, I rejoined the dream I dreamt as I was flying in. It was just the same. I could see a ship drawn up beside the pier at Leningrad, an ancient steamer with belching funnels and swiveling cranes. I could see Brightman, bundled up in his fur coat, as he made his way through the customs shed, and finally I could see the desk where he turned in his passport. He looked up then, showing his face, and it was my face, and as the passport official stamped the documents and handed them back, his face was revealed as well, darkened, the features obscured by the shadow of his cap, but clear enough. My father.